8 years ago, we filed a missing persons report for my daughter. Amy was 15. "Chris, we need to call the police." I struggled to keep my voice calm, but one of us needed to keep our head. Chris was panicking. He paced around the room, holding his head. "No, no, no," he moaned. "Chris, stop. Look at me." I grabbed both his arms as tightly as I could to stop his pacing. I tried to look in his eyes, but he looked everywhere except me. "We will call the police and we will file a report. They'll know what to do. They'll help us," I said firmly. That seemed to snap him out of his trance. He had stopped pacing, then nodded a couple of times, muttering to himself. Amy told us she was going to Melissa's house right after school, and she told Melissa she would walk home. When we called Melissa's parents in a panic, they'd said Amy insisted on walking home that night. They offered to drive her or call me to come get her, but she didn't want them to. She walked out their front door, told Melissa she would see her at school the next day, and that was it. That was the last time anyone saw her. Chris arrived home before me. He asked me if Amy was with me. I could see in his eyes he was panicked before I'd even answered. "Chris, what's wrong?" I asked, putting down the groceries I had picked up on my way home from work. The way he was acting immediately filled me with dread. My heartbeat quickened and I feared the worst. "It's Amy. She's not here, and her phone is on her bed. You know she doesn't go anywhere without that thing. Her school bag isn't... I don't think she ever came home after school." "Okay, well maybe she just forgot it today. I'll call Melissa's house and see if she's there. Just try to breathe, okay, honey?" I said, trying to soothe him. But when Melissa's parents told us Amy had left, it brought Chris to the verge of tears. So we called the police, and they helped us. Sort of. After an exhausting, anxiety-ridden year of investigating, the police came up with nothing. They could establish a timeline before Amy went missing, but not after. It was like she'd vanished without a trace. They looked into every possible scenario and questioned me about my relationship with Amy. I told them the truth, that we had a rocky start and now we worked our way up to a mutual respect. I confided in them that I thought Amy and I would never be best friends, but things were mostly amiable. She was a moody teenager after all. When they asked why I didn't pick Amy up after school, I told them we'd actually had an argument about it that day. I offered to drive to Melissa's after work, but Amy said she would walk home. I told her I would feel better if I drove her, so I knew she would be safe, but Amy rolled her eyes and muttered something about me not being her real mom. Amy and I usually got along. She typically had a cool demeanour towards me, but I could feel she always harboured some resentment about having to live in my house. She had been rolling her eyes and huffing at me more lately, but I chalked that up to just being a teenager. They went over everything with a fine-tooth comb. They questioned everyone in Melissa's neighbourhood. They brought out dogs to search the roads. But all their efforts came up with nothing. There was not a single clue where she went or what had happened to her. The police returned the evidence they'd collected. There was nothing more they could do. We returned Amy's things to her room. For the next 7 years we kept it exactly how she'd left it, like some sort of shrine willing Amy to come home. We even left her phone on her bed, in the same position it had been when she disappeared. The police had thoroughly searched it and drained most of the battery, but because she didn't have her phone with her that day, they couldn't find anything. We saw no reason to charge it back up, so we just let the battery run out. Chris used to go in there sometimes and listen to her voicemail recording, just to hear her voice. When the battery finally died, sometimes I would catch him calling her number from his phone to listen to her voicemail. I tried it once. I even started to leave a message, but I couldn't find the words to say. I was always trying to be strong for Chris, to try and take care of everything, so he could keep going. When I actually tried to speak about how I felt about everything, my words caught in my throat. I choked out a sob and cried until the voicemail reminded me I was leaving a message. Over the years we tried to rebuild our life, but how do you go on without a vital part of your family? We checked ourselves into therapy, but the more we talked to our respective therapists, the bigger the distance between us seemed to grow. Some days Chris didn't even speak to me. Sometimes when he looked at me, it was like I wasn't there at all. Occasionally I would wake up at night only to find his side of the bed cold and unslept in. It was on those nights that I would find him standing in the doorway of Amy's room, just standing there, staring at nothing. "Chris?" I would ask every time. "Are you all right? Come back to bed." And then he would allow me to take his hand, close Amy's door and lead him back to our room. There was one night I tried going in there myself, just to see what Chris found so appealing. Immediately I was unsettled. It was far too quiet in Amy's room. Everything in there had been untouched for years. Goosebumps broke out across my skin and a chill ran up my spine as something in there didn't feel right. As soon as I was able to collect myself, I forced myself to leave the room, shutting the door firmly behind me. I talked to my therapist about how distant we had become. She told me it was common for relationships to become strained after the loss of a child. She suggested I keep trying, even if Chris wasn't receptive. To try to move past Amy's disappearance, I cancelled her phone service. I was sure she wouldn't be coming back, but in hindsight I shouldn't have done that. Chris had tried to call Amy's phone shortly after and exploded into a rage I had never seen before. He yelled and screamed at me so loudly, everything seemed to blend together. I couldn't make out anything he was actually saying. He threw his phone violently, causing it to shatter. I will admit, though, it was nice to see Chris in a state other than that vacant place in his mind. My therapist reminded me that he was still grieving his missing daughter, but I was also grieving too. It was important for me to try to keep both of us moving forward instead of staying stuck in the past. I was starting to feel more and more alone, isolated from the remains of my family. Chris seemed to want nothing to do with me anymore, and with Amy gone, I just felt like a placeholder. I longed for the days when we felt like a family. With only my therapist to talk to, I found myself dreading the lonely nights at my house. I kept everything locked inside myself until my weekly therapy session, where I would simply fall apart. I would cry and cry, babble on endlessly about how guilty I felt, how I should have tried harder with Amy. I should have been more firm with her. I'd even said I thought I should have tried spoiling Amy, maybe that would have improved things between us. I never wanted to replace her mother. Part of me didn't even want to be her mother. I just wanted to get along. I wanted us to go on a vacation and have a good time, unlike when we went to Disney World and Amy sulked the whole time. How can you not like Disney World? Isn't it supposed to be the happiest place on earth? My therapist reassured me none of this was my fault, that as much as I tried to make things better, Amy would have needed to be receptive to my efforts. I often found myself wishing Chris would reassure me the way the therapist did. Sometimes I feel like he blames me for all of this. Nights alone were the worst. The police never outright said Amy died, but sometimes I felt like there was something else in the house with me. I often found myself feeling unnerved. I was terrified I would turn a corner and find myself face to face with Amy, or something worse. I tried to keep myself busy so I wouldn't spend too much time thinking about Amy. I felt sick and my blood ran cold every time. I tried to think about what could have happened to her. I knew something horrible had happened to her, but I had no proof. I felt completely helpless, so I tried to focus on healing my relationship with Chris instead. I knew a weekly date night was out of the question. It was a common solution for couples that had lost their spark, but Chris barely left the house anymore, so I suggested a movie night, every Friday night. Sometimes Chris would let me cuddle up to him. I think he was just humouring me though. He never seemed interested in whatever movie I put on. If I asked what he wanted to watch, he would just grunt at me. On what would have been Amy's 23rd birthday, Chris and I settled down to watch a movie, one of the Harry Potter movies. Since Chris never seemed to have an opinion anymore about anything, I chose something I thought would help me feel close to Amy again. She loved Harry Potter, and there were enough movies I could just cycle through them without it getting too repetitive. Right as we started the movie, we heard something odd coming from deep in the house. My heart rate quickened as we paused the movie and looked at each other. Curiosity filled Chris's eyes as we followed the noise upstairs. It led us to Amy's room. Dread filled my stomach as we slowly pushed open her door. Somehow the air in Amy's room felt quieter and stiller than normal. The screen on Amy's phone was lit up. Even though the phone had been dead for years, she was receiving a phone call from unknown. I picked up the phone with shaking hands. My heart thundered in my chest, and I found myself unable to catch my breath. "Hello?" I choked out. A constant static noise came from the other end. My heart stopped and I forgot to breathe for what felt like minutes before a voice answered on the other end. Mum? Dad? I gasped and dropped the phone in my fright. It bounced off the bed and landed on the floor between us. Who is it? Chris asked. He started to pick up the phone but stopped when the voice spoke again. Mum? Dad? Are you there? And then her voice just cut out. Loud static filled the room, drowning out any thoughts I'd had. And then, just as quickly as Amy's voice cut out, the static stopped too. The silence in the room hung heavy between us. Chris locked himself in our room. I started to make up a bed on the couch when something caught my eye and I stopped. It was a gaudy picture frame housing a photo of the three of us at the beach. It had sequined dragonflies glued to the edge of the frame. I had originally picked it up because Amy loved dragonflies when she was little. The memories came flooding back all at once and I felt dizzy and nauseous. I sat down before I lost my balance. When Amy was 8, I had dragged her to a flea market to try and spend some time with her, much to her reluctance. Chris and I had just seriously begun dating, and Amy was not happy about it. Chris suggested I spend some time with her and he assured me she would warm right up to me. I wasn't sure what to do with an 8-year-old girl, but I thought she might like to go shopping. A flea market had popped up that week and I wanted to go out of curiosity. I picked up the picture frame knowing Amy loved dragonflies, but she just snubbed me. The whole day she glared and rolled her eyes at me, clearly unhappy to be anywhere near me. Finally I pleaded with her to just pick out something she didn't completely hate. She went back to the frame, picked it up and shoved it at me. I paid for it and tried to ignore the apologetic, knowing smile the seller gave me. As we made our way back to the car, I stopped at a table wedged between a stand selling hats and scarves and one selling homemade jams. Odd little trinkets covered the top of the table, and a bored-looking teenager sat behind it, more interested in her book than a potential customer. I can't explain it, but I just felt drawn to that table. My eyes scanned over the merchandise until they settled on what I somehow knew I had to have. My heartbeat thudded in my ears as I stared at it. A little leather-bound book tied shut with a thin piece of rope. The teenager barely registered me when I handed her my money. When we got in the car, I turned to Amy and told her I would help her find a picture to go in her frame if she wanted. She scoffed at me, glared again, and told me not to think she would ever call me Mum. I was so taken aback by this. I've never heard such awful words come out of such a little girl's mouth. I tried to explain that I wasn't trying to replace anyone, but she just sneered at me. We drove in silence. I dropped her off at Chris's house and then hurried home. It started to rain and the little book felt warm in my hands. Cautiously I untied the rope that held it shut and peeked inside. The pages were full of words and symbols I had never seen before. I couldn't make head nor tail of it, but I felt comfort when I looked at those pages. I flipped through them, studying the strange symbols on each one until I stopped at a random page. I had absolutely no idea what I was looking at, but somehow this part felt right. An idea popped into my head and I started gathering things from around my house. Some candles, a bowl, a bottle of dark red wine, and a little plastic dragonfly. I felt vaguely afraid that I was moving on my own, even though I didn't know what I was doing. Somehow my body knew to dim the lights, light the candle, pour the wine in the bowl, place the dragonfly near the bowl, as if on autopilot. Strange, inhuman words filled my head. I began to feel dizzy and light-headed, like I'd had too much to drink, but I hadn't even touched the wine. I tried to stop myself. I knew what I was doing was wrong. The more I tried to stop, the more useless my efforts were. I felt like a puppet on a string. Fear pumped through my veins. The room suddenly felt too small, suffocating, and the threat of something bigger loomed over me. What was I doing? This was way out of my control. What if I opened a portal or summoned a monster? What if I'd killed someone? Frantic thoughts spiraled, overwhelming me. At some point I passed out. When I awoke, wax had dripped down the candle and pooled on my table. I felt a pang of terror as I registered the room around me. The bowl was empty, the dragonfly was gone, the book was gone. What had I done? To this day I have no idea what I did. I completely forgot all about those events until now. I think hearing Amy call me Mum may have triggered my memory, but I have no idea where she is. Since remembering, I've been sick with guilt. I can't eat or sleep, and some nights I find myself tiptoeing down the hall to Amy's room. As soon as I shut myself in, I'm overcome with grief. Did I do this to her? How could I do this if I didn't even know what I was doing? I went up to Amy's room one last time. I felt myself catch my breath, my heart skipping beats. I felt like I was just waiting for something to happen. Being in Amy's room put me on edge. I found myself looking a little too hard in the corners, ears straining to pick up the slightest sound. My hands felt clammy and the room felt too warm, too stuffy. I jumped and let out a gasp as something caught my eye. The screen on Amy's phone was lit up again. I answered it and was met with a loud growl of static. I threw the phone away from me and it bounced a couple of times on the floor. Something snarled and growled on the other end. I strained to listen, while every fibre of my being begged me to run the other way. This time when I left the room, I locked it behind me. Chris probably wouldn't be too happy about that, but I felt being in that room put me in immediate danger. I don't know why Amy disappeared when she was 15, but I think it has something to do with that book and the argument we'd had earlier that day. I scoured the internet and looked everywhere in my house for that book, but I've never been able to find it. It's vanished without a trace. I don't know why it took so long for Amy to call, but wherever she is, I don't think she's still on this earth. My heart skips a beat every time my phone rings now. Sometimes I answer it, and I find only that hissing static on the other end. It was early April 2019. I was 12 at the time, almost 13, and my birthday and my friend Casey's birthday were really close together. Casey's birthday was first and she was having her party at the new house that they'd just bought. I was the arrive, then gradually everyone else turned up. It was all going great and everyone was having a good time. It soon became dark outside, which was awesome because that's when the fun really started. The big event. Flashlight tag. If you never played this, it's basically like tag but with flashlights and you're in the dark. Once we all got to our tiny flashlights, we then picked someone to be the tagger. The game started and it soon occurred to me that we were not just playing any tag, we were playing infection, which is like tag but once you're tagged you join the tagger's team. People were dropping left and right, and me and another kid, Alex, became some of the only survivors. We soon got cornered at the end of a street. The kid who cornered us, I noticed, was more focused on Alex. The house at the end of the street had a garden. I tried using that to my advantage. The big trees and lots of bushes, and when the tagger was focused on Alex, I ducked behind one of the bushes and hid for about 5 minutes. I wanted to play it safe to make sure of my victory. I crouched down and hid as much as I could and had my back turned. I wasn't being found, so eventually I decided to walk out from behind the bush. What happens next still terrifies me to this day. I suddenly felt somebody grab my foot and yank it until I fell to the ground. Luckily though, they lost their grip for a split second, which gave me an opportunity to escape. I ran down the street and didn't look back to who or what was attempting to capture me. After running for a short time, I was found by Carter and Aidan, and I explained to them what had just happened to me. At first a lot of them thought I was joking, until they saw scratches on the back of my legs. We went back inside the house where we talked more about what had just happened. Meanwhile, Casey's dad went out and checked the spot where I said I'd been grabbed, but he saw no one. Some of them suspected at first that the scratches were from the bush, until they realized it was too deep of a cut to just be a bush. We spent the rest of the night indoors and played games. People soon left until it was just Casey, me, Ezekiel and Aidan. I don't remember why, but I went up to Casey's bedroom to grab something. I've never told anyone about this until now. The person that had earlier this evening attacked me was standing at Casey's bedroom window waving at me. It went on for a long, solid 5 seconds, then he ran off. He had long hair down to his shoulders and had an insane look in his eyes. Thankfully, whenever I went over to Casey's house, since then I have never seen this man again. A few years ago when I was 12, I was at my grandma's house in the country with all of my cousins. There were 5 of us ages 13, 12, 10, 6 and 4, and we all decided we wanted to play Ghost in the Graveyard. It's a game played at night where one person hides and the rest try to find them, and when the hider is found they try to tag one of the seekers, and you let the hider know you've found them by shouting, "Ghost in a graveyard." So the eldest decided they wanted to hide first, my sister. Once they were hidden, me and my cousin, we'll call him Tom, and my sister, we'll call them Dawn. The two youngest were too scared to leave the deck. So me and Tom decided to go looking for Dawn. For reference, my grandma had a huge yard at the time, big enough for a pool barn, pool, trampoline and more. Me and Tom approached the propane tank in the yard, and behind it, in the night, you could see a female figure squatting. Me and Tom shouted, "Ghost in the graveyard!" and the figure swayed a bit but didn't move to chase us. I got a little closer and shouted, "Hey, Dawn, we see you, come get us." And still the figure didn't move. We heard the little ones asking us to come back to the deck and let them join me and Tom. We said yes, of course, and went to search the front yard. Once in the front yard, my sister jumps out from underneath a pine tree and tries to tag us. This immediately sends red flags to me and my cousin. We both turn to Dawn and ask, "Why didn't you try to tag us by the propane tank?" To which Dawn replies, "I was here the whole time." Me and Tom ran back to the propane tank and there was no one behind it. We were so freaked out we told everyone to go back inside and didn't tell any of the girls what had happened. When me and Tom were alone, we talked about it and came to the conclusion it definitely wasn't an animal. You could tell as they had long straight hair. Then we thought it might have been Dawn, but when we thought about that we realised it couldn't have been, because although she would have had time to run to the front yard due to the location of the propane tank, we would have seen or heard something run out from behind it, which means that a stranger was sitting behind my grandma's propane tank and let me get within 6 feet of them. Jump forward to the present. All of us are fairly grown up now. I am 18. I had forgotten about this for a while, but then for some reason it popped back into my head, and I decided to see if it was real. So I waited for the next time me and my cousins would get together to ask everyone about it. Dawn still says she was definitely not behind the propane tank, and when I spoke to Tom about it, I asked, "Is this just some weird dream I had, or did this actually happen?" Tom said, "Dude, I thought you didn't remember, and I didn't want to bring it up because I didn't want to sound crazy." That's where the story ends. You don't have to believe me, but it did in fact happen, and it freaks me and Tom out to this day. Thank you for reading. So let me get it started off by saying about 4 families used to live on the Crossbrook land on a farm before my neighbourhood that always felt off was built. This was just 1 year ago in Perry Hall, Baltimore, Maryland, and I'm not making any of this up. I was 12 and I was outside with my friends playing. I forget what day it was. All I remember was it was during the summer. We were playing hide and seek tag, aka manhunt, and we saw someone in my friend's house window. I asked my friend, who was on my team, if anyone was in the house. I'm gonna call him C. C said, "Nah, my dad's at work and my mom is at her friend's house." We both looked at the window and he saw it too. This time when we looked it was smiling, then suddenly it disappeared. So we rounded up our friends to check the house. There was 6 of us in total. We argued who would go inside and who would stay outside. I just got my new 6 Plus for my birthday and wanted to be like a ghost hunter. Never do that, by the way. Leave it to the other dumbasses. So being stupid kids, we thought, hey, let's get my phone and record everything. Let's try and catch a ghost. We went inside and checked the downstairs area first. His basement always creeped the shit out of me, but I couldn't figure out why. He had a finished basement and this creep-ass old toy castle thing. We searched the basement until we came to the castle and other toys. Suddenly we hear a creepy jingling sound coming from the castle. At this point I was like, fuck it. Picked up the castle and slammed it. It didn't break, but the batteries fell out. Then it happened again. The sound happened again, but there were no batteries. Me and my friends, terrified at this point, jumped on it until it shattered. Then we saw something dart upstairs. We ran after it and followed it to the upstairs and waited till R said, "What the fuck is that?" I looked through the camera we were filming with, and we saw some black, like blacker than black, wide-mouthed figure, naked in the reflection of a mirror on my camera that was C's parents' door. We sat there recording it. Then we saw something dark run across C's parents' room. We were in shock. We heard a loud-ass baby crying and laughing. Then something crashed, and it ran at us screeching. We got the fuck out of there. I had the recording on my phone, but my brother's iCloud, my dad's iCloud, and my iCloud were all synced together, and my brother had deleted stuff off of his phone, which deleted off of mine too. And guess what? He deleted the video. It'll be somewhere, probably on my cringy-ass Musical.ly account, but the video was cut after the figure ran off, before the thing ran at us, so all you can hear is the crying. I'm gutted I lost the video. We saw the figure again for the last time in the woods. Me, C, R, T, J, and B went into the woods feeling like exploring something. We were walking around until R found a saw with a red substance on it. It was a clean saw too. Rand said, "Guys, what the hell? What the fuck did I just find?" He picked it up and it was dripping. T said, "I think that's... Guys, we should leave." I said, "No, we're gonna keep exploring. The saw could have been used to kill a deer or something." C snatched the saw and threw it into the stream. Then we decided to keep exploring. Nothing was said until J said, "Oh my god, look! B found a cross." B found a grave. A homemade fucking grave in the woods. If you don't believe me, search the woods at Crossbrook Drive, Perry Hall, Maryland, 21128. There's a stretch of road with a pond to your left and a field to your right where the woods are. To the right of the woods is a park, but close to the park and probably in the middle of the woods is a makeshift grave with arrows pointing up on the trees. J and B, these kids were assholes and always fought with me for no reason. They walked to the cross and started snapping it and vandalizing it. Then all of a sudden we heard a noise come from the trees. We heard the same crying we heard earlier. We couldn't see anything. Then we heard laughing all around us. The same laugh. That same fucking laugh. I picked up my slow-ass friend R and started to run. Everyone followed. My friend passed out and I looked back and saw the same god-forsaken thing. It threw a branch at me, cutting my heel. We made it out of the woods, then heard the loudest screaming and screeching I've ever heard in my whole life. Also to mention that in another neighborhood forest, there was a discarded bathtub that was stained red. Please, whatever you do, don't go to Cross Brook. And yes, this is a real, true story. Last summer, my parents took a trip to the Dominican Republic. This was one of many of their holiday experiences. They tend to travel every year, sometimes multiple times a year. Yes, I'm jealous too. They were coming home from their last afternoon out when they reached their hotel room at the Rio Resort. They realized it had been ransacked. Clothing was strewn across the room. Much of my mother's purse contents were emptied on the bed, and her purse seemed to be missing. Rather than exit the room immediately, my mum decided to open the closet to check if the safe had been broken into. As she was examining the closet, she looked down and saw a pair of feet and immediately slammed the door shut and screamed, "There's a bitch in the closet!" The woman in the closet, who appeared to be in her 20s and wearing a Rio bracelet, then began pushing her way out and reaching for a crowbar on a shelf above her head. Fortunately, my mother was able to fight for her for it and throw it out of reach. My mum then yelled for my dad to grab the woman's purse in case it had a gun in it. He quickly ran around the bed and threw the purse and grabbed the woman. My mum picked up the hotel phone and tried to dial out, only to find that the phone didn't work. Then the woman began screaming, my baby, in an attempt to get my parents to let go of her and search for a baby. My mum quickly peeked in the closet, under the bed and behind the shower, and there was no baby in sight, during which time the woman was able to wiggle out of my dad's arms and run for the door. My dad tackled her like a football player and dragged her down the stairs to the lobby alongside my mum, who she was kicking and grabbing her hair. My mum screamed, "We have a robber, please help!" Un momento, was the response the front desk gave her. No mementos, my mother responded. We need help, now. Let her go, we take care of it, they said. My parents declined and insisted that they call the police. When the police finally arrived and took the woman in, her purse contents were found to contain several brand new cell phones, expensive jewellery, checks with various individuals' names on them, and $100 bill which my mum pocketed for the inconvenience. It was discovered that she was well known. Apparently she had gotten her hands on one of the resort wristbands and had used it to gain access and steal hotel keys. She was found to have a copy of my parents' hotel receipt showing what days they were scheduled to be there, and that she had a history of purposely waiting until the last day guests were scheduled to be there to prey on them, since the laws in the Dominican apparently only require the police to detain these robbers for 24 hours, unless the person making the complaint stays to pursue charges against them. To our knowledge, the woman got away with it and probably continues to prey on tourists at this resort. All I know is I'm just glad this crazy woman didn't have a gun and that my parents didn't end up seriously injured or killed. I'm also glad that they didn't have their valuables stolen.